June 22, 1941, the Soviet Union before dawn, the silence along the eastern border of Europe is broken by the roar of engines and the flash of artillery. Thousands of guns open fire at once, lighting the horizon from the Baltic to the Black Sea. German tanks surge forward through the mist, aircraft swarm above, and the largest invasion in history begins. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's war against the Soviet Union, is underway. 4 months, German soldiers have been gathering on the frontier, and now, more than 3 million men cross the line into Soviet territory. The campaign is presented as a crusade against Bolshevism, but it is, in truth, a war of annihilation. Behind the front follow Einsatzgruppen, special units with orders to eliminate entire populations including Jews, communists and anyone deemed unworthy of life. The vast territory of the East becomes a landscape of fire, hunger, and execution. At first, victory seems certain. Soviet defenses collapse, entire armies surrender, and the Wehrmacht advances hundreds of kilometers in a matter of weeks. Yet beneath the triumph lies a moral abyss. Burning villages, starving prisoners, and civilians shot on the spot. Officers and soldiers alike convince themselves they are serving their nation, not Nazi ideology. Among them is a man who embodies this paradox, a disciplined professional shaped by the traditions of the old German army, now serving a regime that has turned war into genocide. His name is Werner von Erdmannsdorff. Heinrich Werner Bernhard von Erdmannsdorff was born on July 26, 1891 in the town of Botzen, in the Kingdom of Saxony, then part of the German Empire. He grew up in a traditional officer's family. His father, Heinrich von Erdmannsdorff, was a noble royal Saxon administrator and former cavalry captain, while his mother, Gertrude von Schönberg, came from an old Saxon noble family. The household valued duty, discipline, and loyalty to the monarchy, qualities that shaped Werner's character from an early age. He also had a younger brother, Gottfried, who was active in the German military and later became a general major. On October 1, 1910, Werner von Erdmannsdorff entered a Saxon light infantry unit of the German army. His diligence earned him steady promotion, and by August 1912 he had already become an officer. When the First World War broke out in the summer of 1914, Erdmannsdorff was serving as a company officer. His battalion fought on the Western Front, where he was wounded on September 23, 1914. After recovering he returned to the front, and over the next 4 years, he served on both the Western and Eastern fronts, taking part in the massive operations that defined the conflict: desperate counterattacks, endless artillery bombardments, and the growing exhaustion of the German army. Erdmannsdorff's wartime service earned him several German and Austro-Hungarian decorations. In 1917, he received the Knight's Cross of the Military Order of St. Henry, one of Saxony's highest military honors, and by the war's end he held both classes of the Iron Cross. He also served as regimental adjutant and staff officer. But like millions of Germans, at the end of the war, he returned home to a nation in chaos. The Kaiser Wilhelm II had abdicated in the autumn of 1918, the monarchy was gone, and revolution swept across the country. The army that emerged from the ruins of the empire, the Reichswehr, was small and limited by the Treaty of Versailles to 100,000 men, but it retained the traditions of professionalism and hierarchy. During the new Weimar Republic, Erdmannsdorff stayed in the army and attended staff courses that broadened his military and intellectual horizons. In 1919, he married Helene Anna Eleonore von Skirschke-Und Bogendorf, who, like him, came from an old aristocratic family. Throughout the 1920s, Erdmannsdorff moved between infantry and cavalry assignments, rising through the ranks. He also taught tactics at the infantry school in Dresden, and his teaching also reflected the lessons learned from the First World War. He belonged to a generation of officers who saw themselves as custodians of a professional military tradition untouched by politics, a belief that would later prove impossible to uphold under the Nazi regime. By the early 1930s, Germany was changing. The economy was collapsing, and radical movements were gaining ground. When Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party took power in 1933, many professional officers, including Erdmannsdorff, greeted the new government with cautious optimism. They were not Nazis, but they welcomed the regime's promise to rebuild the army and restore national pride. The personal oath to Hitler, introduced in 1934, bound them not just to the state but to the Führer himself, a moral trap that would define their future. During the early years of the Nazi regime, as the rearmament of the German army accelerated, Erdmannsdorff continued to rise through the ranks. The idea of a small army, then named the Reichswehr, was abolished, and in 1935 the new German army, the Wehrmacht, was created in open violation of the Treaty of Versailles. By November 1938, Erdmannsdorff commanded his own regiment. For him, and for the Nazis, the years of quiet preparation were over. Germany was ready for conquest of Europe. When the Second World War began on September 1, 1939, Erdmannsdorff led his regiment during the invasion of Poland. His troops fought in the rapid campaign that crushed the Polish army in a matter of weeks. To officers like him, the early victories seemed to vindicate everything the new Wehrmacht stood for: efficiency, speed, and discipline. After the Polish campaign, he served on the Western Front in 1940 and later in the Soviet Union after June 22, 1941, when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa. On the Eastern Front, Erdmannsdorff was commanding an entire division and took part in the great encirclement battles at Białystok in today's Poland, Minsk, the capital of the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, and Smolensk in western Russia, where hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were captured. Conditions for these prisoners were brutal. Tens of thousands died from hunger, exposure, and neglect in German prisoner of war camps. Often just fenced-off fields without shelter, starving men sometimes resorted to cannibalism to survive. In the meantime, Erdmannsdorff's division pushed toward Leningrad, today's St. Petersburg, enduring heavy fighting in the forests and marshes of the north. The campaign was savage. Villages burned, civilians were starved or shot on sight, and entire regions were devastated. For his leadership in holding positions during the winter of 1941 to 1942 against Soviet counterattacks, Erdmannsdorff was awarded the German Cross in Gold, followed a few months later by the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, one of Nazi Germany's highest military awards. In the official citation, he was praised for his outstanding leadership during the defense of Tikhvin and the withdrawal of his division across the Volkhov, actions that helped stabilize the front near Leningrad. But behind this heroism lay the grim reality of a war of annihilation. The German army in the east was not merely fighting soldiers, it was waging an ideological war dictated by Hitler's racial policies. Civilians suffered terribly under occupation, and Soviet prisoners of war died by the hundreds of thousands. Erdmannsdorff, like many professional officers, continued to serve despite these inhuman realities, focused on duty and blind to the crimes committed around him. In early 1943, Erdmannsdorff was promoted to Generalleutnant, which was an equivalent to Major General. His experience and reliability made him a typical product of the Wehrmacht's command system: efficient, loyal, and obedient. But the war was turning. Stalingrad fell to the Soviets in February 1943, and the myth of German invincibility was shattered. Erdmannsdorff spent the following months in staff and reserve roles, serving among other positions as a military inspector in Dresden. At this stage of the war his duties were largely administrative, but that soon changed. By 1944, with Germany under pressure from all sides, he was briefly assigned to command Army Corps in Norway and was later sent to Yugoslavia. The Balkans were a nightmare for the German occupation forces during the war, since from the beginning there was partisan warfare, reprisals from all participants in the conflict, and chaos. At the end of January 1945, Erdmannsdorff was appointed commanding general of the German corps stationed in Yugoslavia. One of the units under Erdmannsdorff's command was the 7th SS Volunteer Mountain Division, Prinz Eugen, notorious for its murderous behavior toward civilians. The victims were shot, slaughtered, and tortured, or burnt to death in burning houses, where a victim was found not in his house but on the road or in the field some distance away. He was murdered and burnt there. Infants with their mothers, pregnant women and frail old people were also murdered. On one occasion, in the settlement of Vilik, a 9-year-old boy was skinned alive by 2 men. This was no exception in the region. Almost all units under Erdmannsdorff's command took part in brutal reprisals against civilians as part of the anti-partisan campaign. Erdmannsdorff's final campaign came in March 1945. During the Lake Balaton offensive in Hungary, one of Hitler's last desperate attempts to halt the Soviet Red Army. The operation failed disastrously, and the remnants of Erdmannsdorff's corps retreated westward, hoping to surrender to the Western Allies. When Nazi Germany capitulated in May 1945, Erdmannsdorff was captured by the British. Like many officers of the defeated Wehrmacht, he expected internment or interrogation by the British or Americans. However, on June 4, 1945, he was handed over to the Yugoslav authorities, who accused him of responsibility for atrocities committed by German forces in the Balkans. The Yugoslav partisans, led by Josip Broz Tito, were carrying out swift retribution against occupying forces and collaborators. Erdmannsdorff was taken to Ljubljana in Slovenia, along with 3 other German generals, Gustav Fehn, Friedrich Stephan, and Heinz Kattner. There was no formal trial and the 4 men were executed by firing squad on June 5, 1945. His wife, Helene von Skirschke-Uend-Bogendorf, did not learn of his death for several years. When the partisans shot him for crimes committed by units under his command, he was 53 years old.